If you're a pasta lover like me, then this is the mega video for you. We're going to go over in this video how to think about pasta and what role it can play in a healthy and balanced diet. I'm going to explain to you some major pasta mistakes that you want to avoid when you go to make a pasta dish yourself. And stay tuned to the end because you're gonna help me cook a pasta dish myself. Very simple, very healthy, very easy. I promise you're gonna do great. You will be walking away from this video absolutely craving a delicious pasta, guaranteed. Hey there, I'm Dr. Anna. I'm a medical doctor. I was trained in Italy, and on this channel, you're gonna learn how to master your health with the Mediterranean diet. All right, let's dive in. First, we're gonna go over, is pasta healthy for us and how we can think about pasta as part of a healthy and balanced diet? Okay, let's start. So lately, pasta, and more generally carbohydrates, has been associated with gaining weight and being overweight. Why? Well, let's lay out some context so we can understand the situation better. For many years, people were hypothesizing that eating a lot of fat would make you gain fat. Sounds simple, right? Doctors, nutritionists, and scientists used to advise to eat a low-fat diet, thinking that a low-fat diet would help people lose weight, improve their cholesterol, and reverse and protect against heart disease. Turns out that is not exactly how it works. Then in the 1960s and 70s, researchers started digging into this idea, and it turns out they discovered something remarkable. They found that there are some parts of the world, including the Mediterranean region, where people are consuming a diet that is pretty high in fat, and yet they are not obese like they are in other countries. And what was more profound is that the people who are eating some of these traditional diets that happen to have higher fat content also had lower rates of heart disease. So researchers and doctors started scratching their heads and realized they needed to go back to the drawing board. So the new hypothesis became, if fats used to be bad, but now they're good, maybe then carbohydrates, which we thought were good, are actually bad. And so the new enemy became the carbohydrate. Since that time, new dietary trends have been popping up all over the place that are diminishing the amount of carbohydrate. Think of things like the Atkins diet, the paleo diet, the keto diet, or more recently, the carnivore diet. Gurus of these diets are claiming that carbohydrates are the enemy and they are causing all of your health problems and your symptoms. And the recent interest in these types of diets has been absolutely exploding in the last few years. Now, since pasta is one of the most beloved carbohydrate dishes in the United States, in a country where obesity is amongst the highest in the entire world, it's easy to point the finger at pasta. But do not be fooled. Now, with a little more context, let's take a look at pasta at a much deeper level. So what is pasta exactly? Very simply, it's a food made from grinding up grain, most commonly wheat, into a flour and then adding it to water to make a sort of paste. And at this point, it can be shaped into many different sizes and forms. And then those shapes are dried and later added to water again, boiled to turn them into pasta. And a pasta dish is often prepared with some type of a sauce along with it. So since pasta comes from grains, it is a carbohydrate food. Now, carbohydrates provide our bodies with a source of energy, and that energy is a molecule called glucose. And it just so happens that glucose is the preferred source of fuel for the cells of our body. And for more information about how carbohydrate metabolism works, check out this video over here where I break down the concept of glycemic index and what it means for you. So then what happens when you eat a bowl of pasta? To answer this question and to understand if pasta alone is linked to obesity and weight gain, we need to take a look at the Italian population, the people who invented this stuff in the first place. Doing this, you are going to notice something remarkable. Italians eat pasta every single day, and I'm not exaggerating. I lived in Italy for 6 years, and I kid you not, almost all of my friends there are eating pasta at least once a day. And this shocked me because when you look around at the Italians who are walking down the street, they're very seldom overweight. And this is evidenced by the data that comes out of this country. Italy has one of the lowest rates of obesity in the entire world. Although I should mention that the trend in Italy is similar to the rest of the world in that obesity rates are increasing. So then you might be wondering, if Italians are eating pasta every single day, how is it that their obesity rates are so low? Well, here's where people really get it twisted. Not all carbohydrates are the same. To understand this, we need to understand how to think about and classify carbohydrate foods. So one of the frameworks for this is a formulated idea that separates simple from complex carbohydrates. And the idea here is that a simple carbohydrate is a food that will be simply broken down in our body during the digestive process to then absorb the glucose so our cells can use it for energy. And this happens because that food happens to have a more simple chemical structure. In turn, because it's simply broken down, that process happens more quickly, which means our blood sugar is going to spike faster. Contrast this with a complex carbohydrate, a food that has a more complex chemical makeup. That food will be broken down more slowly in our body and thus will increase our blood sugar more slowly. And the point here is that the more slowly sugar is released into our bloodstream, the better that is for our body. We know that blood sugar spikes are associated with type 2 diabetes and can cause damage in many parts of our body when that process is repeated many times over many years. Additionally, having high spikes in our blood sugar is not good for our pancreas. It causes it to overwork itself, producing more insulin that can then cause something called insulin resistance. And we know that insulin resistance is a driving mechanism underlying obesity, type 2 diabetes, and even cardiovascular disease. So what are some examples of these simple or complex carbs? Well, the most classic example of a simple carb is white sugar or sucrose. This kind of sugar is often added to baked goods like cookies, cakes, and crackers. And recognize that a lot of this added sugar is associated with negative health outcomes. Alternatively, these complex carbohydrates tend to be natural sources of carbohydrate in our plant foods. So these are things like vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and legumes like lentils or beans, and even the carbohydrate that's inside of nuts, seeds, dairy. So think of these complex carbohydrates as sources of good carbs for your body. So where's the debate exactly? Well, some people quickly assume that pasta, because it is a refined food, that is where you take the whole grain source and you have to mill it down into a flour, makes it a simple carbohydrate. But this turns out to be false. It just so happens that foods with similar carbohydrate content can be digested completely differently in our bodies. And the key difference is that carbohydrates are digested much more slowly when they also have starch and fiber intact with them. And this is what most people misunderstand about pasta. While yes, it is refined from taking a whole grain and breaking it down, pasta is digested as a slow form complex carbohydrate, which when consumed in an overall balanced diet is much less likely to lead to insulin resistance and obesity. And there's a bunch of research backing this up. Some researchers have in fact shown that pasta in and of itself is not linked to obesity. And this comes from a mix of both observational studies and clinical trials in humans. So this article here is showing that pasta, in fact, has a low glycemic response since it still contains fiber. The authors of this article conclude that pasta, in the context of an overall low glycemic index dietary pattern, does not cause you to gain fat or adiposity. And they conclude that, in fact, it can even reduce the amount of weight gain compared with a higher glycemic index dietary pattern. And this article here discusses how pasta is associated with an overall increased nutrient intake in a diet and with improved diet quality. And this article here talks about how more than 1/4 of the total cases of type 2 diabetes in the world are associated with a lower overall intake of whole grains. And we know that pasta is a source of whole grains in our diet. So if this is really just piquing your curiosity, I want you to go ahead and subscribe so you can get more of this really important information. And it helps us get these videos out to more folks. All right, so at this point, you might be wondering, if pasta is not bad for us, does that also mean that it's good for us? Well, this answer is going to depend on 4 factors. So factor number 1, the method of manufacturing. Now, the glycemic response is going to depend on how it is processed. So it's theorized that pasta from Italy may be a little bit different than the pasta made in other parts of the world, like in the US. A lot of Italians like to point at the heritage of some of the wheat grains used to make pasta and how these grains are different than the wheat that comes out of the United States. They say that ancient grains like kamut, durum, and farro are quite different than the modern bread wheats that are most commonly used to make pasta in other places. Factor number 2, and this is the amount of pasta eaten. So as it turns out, portion sizes are dramatically different in Italian restaurants compared to American. And part of this is that in Italy, you're usually having a dinner in 2 separate dishes. You have your first course and your your second course. Often pasta is eaten as one of these courses. And when you think about what you're eating in your overall meal, if you're ordering 2 separate dishes, each of those is probably slightly less than if it was just one main dish for your entire meal. Additionally, when Italians eat pasta, they're almost always measuring the amount that they want to eat, especially when they're cooking it in their house, which usually ranges anywhere from 80 to 120 grams. The third factor to consider when understanding if pasta is good for us is the way the dish is prepared. So this is really dramatically different from a classical Italian prepared pasta dish from an American style pasta dish. Usually Italian pasta has sauce that's sort of sticking to the pasta rather than swimming in it. American style pasta likes to go a lot heavier on the cheese and the meat sauces, while in general, an Italian pasta dish is going to have a wide variety of sauces. It can be vegetarian, it can just be herbs or nuts and seeds, or it can have a fish or a seafood. And in thinking about the dish preparation, this is where a lot of the hysteria comes into play. If you're thinking about pasta considered alone in a meal in terms of how it's going to impact our digestion and our overall health, you're not really thinking of this equation correctly, because almost always pasta in the Mediterranean diet sense is never eaten alone. It's going to come with it sources of healthy fat like olive oil and other proteins like the fish or seafood, nuts or seeds, or even a meat sauce. As well, a pasta dish might have other sources of carbohydrates and good healthy fiber. There might be some vegetables mixed in and some herbs, or even legumes like beans. All of these factors together, thinking about the amount of fat, the amount of protein, the amount of fiber in any meal, including a pasta dish, is going to dramatically impact the way it's metabolized in our body. And that's what's really making a difference in our overall health. And then finally, the fourth factor to consider when thinking about if pasta is actually good for us is how pasta is eaten in the context of the rest of somebody's diet and overall lifestyle. Pasta in and of itself is known to be a very satiating food, meaning when traditionally prepared, it's going to help us feel full. And we know that feeling full is really crucial to overall reducing the amount of calories eaten in an entire day. Not to mention the fact that pasta intake has been associated with an overall higher diet quality. So where does this leave us? So if we understand that traditionally prepared pasta dishes are great and they are not associated with obesity or weight gain, then we can incorporate pasta into an overall balanced, healthy diet, just like the Italians do. Now, let's talk about some common pasta mistakes that you definitely want to avoid for making a successful pasta dish. Mistake number 1 is preparing your pasta swimming in the oiliest, cheesiest, meatiest sauce that you can't even see the bottom of the bowl. Most of the bowl is just sauce. Where's the pasta? The equation is completely flipped in Italy. People are eating pasta where it's mostly the pasta and then the sauce is just kind of sticking to the pasta itself. It's not swimming in oil at the bottom. One of the most beautiful things is having a fresh ragu from Bologna or Modena, one of those cities in Emilia-Romagna, the best food region of Italy in my opinion. And the ragu, the meat sauce, just sticks to the pasta and it's like this symphony of flavors in your mouth and you can't believe how good it is. But it's so not that heavy. Like it's not that oily, it's not wet, it's not dripping. That is something to pay attention to. In Italy, we mix the sauce into the pasta in the pot before you serve it. It's not this dry heap of spaghetti and then separate big chunky wet heap of sauce on top and then you hand that over to somebody. That would not be considered a pasta in Italy. They would never serve that to you. So if you've already learned something new, I want you to subscribe to this channel so that you can avoid all the mistakes and make sure you're eating the best, highest quality, most delicious and nutritious Mediterranean diet foods that there are. Okay, massive mistake number 2 to avoid is not measuring your pasta before you prepare it. What? Okay, let me break this down. The way we eat pasta in this country is this like huge, massive portion. But the way pasta is eaten in Italy is often a first course. So it's called a primo, the first dish. Usually a dinner or even a lunch, depending on the setting, are dishes that come out in sequence. So you have the antipasto or the appetizer. Often it's like a little bite that's shared, something small. And then you have your primo course, your first course, and it's often a pasta. And lo and behold, it's actually not a huge volume. It's not a huge portion, because after you finish your first course, you're gonna have your second course, the secondo, and that's going to have your protein, your fish or your meat, and a vegetable, maybe some side dishes called contorni, right? So the way that we think of pasta is always this massive volume of pasta, massive amounts, and that's just not the way it's eaten there. Something that I learned after spending a lot of time in Italy, when I finally spent time in my friends' houses with their families, is that before they're going to go cook their pasta, before they even boil it, they measure the weight of what they want. Of course, everything there is in the metric system in grams. So they say, how many grams do you want? And in advance, you know in your mind, I'm kind of hungry, but not that hungry. I guess I only want 85 grams. But if you're really hungry, you might say, ooh, I want 130 grams, 150, whatever it is. So they actually plan in advance how much they're gonna eat before they even start cooking it. We tend not to do that in this country. We make huge batches of things, huge volumes, so that we can take seconds or thirds easily. And that portion control becomes impossible when you have so much food right in front of your face. So they make it easier for themselves. They do the portion control before they even prepare the food, so that when they're done, they're just done. Okay, massive mistake number 3 is something that I'm actually really guilty of, and I have to confess, this was a very embarrassing thing for me, but I'll tell you this story. I was in Italy, and I had been living there now almost 3 years, and I finally was like really feeling Italian. I was eating pasta almost every day. I was like, yeah, I got this, I can do it. And I had some friends over for dinner, my Italian friends. This is a very bold move, mind you. I said, I'm gonna cook. Me, the American, cooking for the Italians, very risky. But I went for it. I started cooking the pasta, and one of my friends, she came over to the stove. She was kind of watching me over my shoulder, and she just looks at me and she goes, what are you doing? And I was like a deer in headlights. Like, oh my God, what did I do? What was wrong? And I did what my parents had always taught me to do. I start boiling the water, and then I put a little, like a schlug, like just a little splash of olive oil on top of the water before I pour the pasta into the boiling water. And my friend looked at me and she's like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm putting a splash of olive oil in the water. She's like, why would you do that? I said, with all this confidence, so it doesn't stick. And she says to me, like, where did you learn that? She said, that makes no sense. Oil and water separate. So why would the oil even touch the pasta? The pasta's in the water. I felt so stupid because that's so obvious. Like, I've studied chemistry, I'm a doctor, I know this, but it didn't occur to me. I was just doing what people around me had always done. My parents taught me to do this. How did we know? Just water, guys. Water and salt. That's it, no oil. Are you ready for massive pasta mistake number 4? That is like a heinous crime. It is something that unfortunately I'm seeing on social media all the time. And Patty, if you're watching this somehow, you're gonna know what I'm talking about, because you've made a lot of videos complaining and kvetching over the exact same thing. So people, you have to boil pasta to cook it. You cannot just put raw pasta into dishes. You can't put raw pasta that's never been boiled into a dish, smother it in sauce, smother it in meat, smother it in cheese, and bake it. Like, what? Pasta needs to be boiled. It's like eating raw rice, like hard. I don't even know how that would taste. But this also came to my attention when my darling sister, and this was years before I lived in Italy, she started cooking dinner for me, and she said, oh, I'll make ravioli. We didn't make it by scratch. We bought it at the grocery store. She takes the ravioli in the package, and right from the fridge, opens the package up, puts it in the pan, adds the oil, and starts heating it up. And I was like, hey, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm making ravioli. And this was kind of an innocent mistake on her part, because often ravioli is prepared in a pan with oil or butter right before it's served. But you guys, ravioli is boiled first. You have to cook the pasta. So please cook your pasta. Don't be that person that is preparing raw pasta. Heaven forbid you're preparing that for someone else to eat as well. You guys gotta cook it. You gotta boil it in water. You can't skip that step. If you guys are learning something today, if you're finding value, please subscribe to my channel. I want to keep you all safe and sound in eating the Mediterranean diet the way it's meant to be eaten. Now, I gotta ask, Don't be shy. Which of these things are you guilty of? Put it in the comments below. I'm guilty, I told you. Number 3, I did that, oil in the water. So don't be shy, share with us. We would love to help each other out. Let's make this community a vibrant place where people are enjoying the pasta that they deserve. Share it with somebody who deserves to have this knowledge bestowed upon them. Give it to somebody else, a loved one, a friend, a neighbor, and make sure that you do not wreak havoc on your community by not preparing your pasta in the way it's meant to be prepared. And now, strap on that apron. We're gonna jump in the kitchen and you will help me make a very simple pasta dish for yourself or your family. What do we need in order to do this really well? Well, you need a large pot with a lid. You need a large spoon or a tablespoon. You need some kind of a cooking tool to stir the pasta around. You're going to need a scale, a colander for straining it, and then we have our ingredients. We have the pasta itself that I'm going to use, a style of short pasta called rigatoni. It's my favorite. Then we have olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, and then we have salt, any kind of salt that you like. And if you're looking to get some more equipment so that you can make really healthy Mediterranean dishes yourself, I have a bunch of links below in the description of my favorite cooking tools, so you can check those out if you're interested. So, when it comes to making pasta, the really key thing is to do things in the right order. Now, if you wanted to make pasta from scratch, you could totally do that. You could get the flour out on the table, get your egg, start mixing it, or maybe if you're gonna have a non-egg kind, just get your water and make it all by hand or with the machine. That's totally fine and that's delicious and amazing. But if you're short on time and you wanna use a store-bought kind, that's also great. So what we wanna do is first put the amount of water we need into our pot. Usually for a personal portion for one person, you'd want to boil around 3 quarts of water or maybe 4. And if you're going to be cooking for 2, about 6 quarts of water should probably do the trick. So I take my large pot this size and I fill it about 2/3 high. I don't actually measure the amount of water. The first thing you want to do is start bringing your water to a boil. And it's very important to put a lot of salt in the water, because the idea is you want the water to be as salty as the sea. That's the Italian way. So you put your salt in, you bring it to a boil. In the meantime, you want to measure the amount of pasta that you want to eat. Now, this is one of the key differences between the way Italians eat pasta and the way people eat pasta in the United States, for example. Italians always measure the amount of pasta that they want to eat before they actually cook it. And in the European system, they're usually using the metric system. So they're gonna weigh it and understand the number of grams of the pasta that they're interested in. Now, Italians typically know the grams of pasta they want depending on how hungry they are, and they're used to doing this, so they have a really good, precise understanding of what 100 grams of pasta looks like and how that's gonna make them feel. My typical go-to is to also weigh my pasta in grams, because that's just what I got used to. If I'm really hungry and I want like a proper portion of pasta that's gonna really fill me, I'm going to go for about 120 grams myself. If I'm looking for a lighter portion of pasta, anywhere from 80 to 100 grams usually does the trick. So you just have to experiment and play with your own hunger and what your body's needs are and that kind of thing. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to weigh the amount of pasta that I need to make for myself and my husband. This is gonna be a loud part. What I typically do is I let the gram number go a little bit higher than my target, because I know I'm always going to bite and taste a piece of pasta to know when it's done. Now, a lot of people are happy to just look at the package and say, okay, it needs to cook for 11 minutes. They set the timer, 11 minutes, and then they're just done. I honestly never do that. I just put it in and I kind of watch the pasta and I can see how it's evolving as it's boiling. And then at a certain point, I'm gonna bite it and I'm gonna taste it to understand how cooked it is. So I'm going to bring my pasta water up to a much higher boil. So I'm gonna turn up that heat. Now I'm gonna add a lot of salt to this water to make it as salty as the sea. One of the things people do wrong very often in the US, which I have come to learn, is to put olive oil in the pasta water. That is an absolute no. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense that you wouldn't want to do that because the pasta is boiling inside the water part, and oil and water don't mix. So if you're putting oil into water, the idea that that's going to prevent the pasta from sticking doesn't really make sense because the pasta is not really going to come into direct contact with the oil. It's in the water. The other thing is that when you want to bring your pasta water to a boil, put the lid on it. It's going to go way faster. So we are getting close. We are almost boiling. I like to wait till the water is totally at a rolling boil. Then I put my pasta in, but technically you could add it a little bit earlier if you wanted to. All right, we're boiling. So now I'm going to put my pasta into the water, and then we're gonna leave the lid off. So it's going to boil out in the open. And I have my tool to make sure. I always give it a quick stir at the beginning to keep it from sticking to the edges or all being in one clump. That's honestly one of the most unfortunate things, is when it's been 10 minutes and your pasta's been boiling and you go over it and you didn't remember to stir it and it's all in one chunk at the bottom. At that point, it's really hard to separate it without them ripping apart. So I just like to get them kind of dancing, and then they're gonna do their magic. Now let's talk about olive oil in pasta for a second. So as we said before, we're not going to put olive oil into the boiling water because that doesn't make any sense. When the pasta is done boiling, we're going to strain it in our colander in the sink, and then we're going to put the sauce on top of it back in the pot before we serve it. That is really important. But how much olive oil should we use? Well, there are certain types of sauces that you would have on a pasta, like a pesto. It's going to be very dense in olive oil. And so you don't really need to add any olive oil back into the pasta before just adding your sauce, because that type of a sauce is so oily itself. But when I'm cooking pasta al pomodoro, which is just pasta with tomato sauce or any other kind of vegetable sauce, I do want to put a little bit of olive oil onto the pasta before the sauce because I don't want it to be sticking. And that sauce itself is watery, and if I'm not fast enough with getting it in there, it's already sticking together. So I'm gonna just stir it around a little bit. We had a little bit of foaming happening inside of the pot, totally normal. And the kind of pasta that I buy actually does come from Italy. Now there's a few Italian brands that are sold in the US commonly. One of them is Barilla. Another one that I'm seeing pop up all the time, and it's one of my favorites that I was actually buying when I lived in Italy, is called Rumo. Now I don't have any affiliations with either of those companies. It's just what I like to eat with my family. So I thought I'd let you know. Now when it comes to the shape of your pasta, any of them are appropriate at any time. I typically like to eat a long pasta half the time and a short pasta the other half. If you travel to Italy, there are going to be certain regions that have different shapes that are native to that area. And then their local sauce is typically served with a specific shape of pasta. For example, in the town of Genoa, that's where the basil pesto comes from. Often there's going to be these really tiny, twisty pastas called trofie. And that's like the classic way that pesto pasta is served, which is kind of cool. And it just comes from that region. But everywhere you go in Italy, you're going to have some nuances and differences from one town to another, which makes it so much fun. But where I am in the United States, there's not really any rules when it comes to what shape of pasta you have with what kind of sauce. You really could just do whatever you like. Okay, so we are boiling. By the way, if you like this video so far, make sure to subscribe and follow for more, because we're gonna keep these recipe videos coming. It's my dedication to all of you to help you eat the Mediterranean diet and follow a Mediterranean lifestyle, because it's just so darn healthy for us. So as much as I can make that easier for you guys, I'm going to do that. All right, now we have our strained pasta that is dry and ready to go. The rule of thumb is to take 1 tablespoon of olive oil per person eating it. So this is a large spoon, so it's roughly a tablespoon. I'm going to put 2 spoons because this is going to be a pasta for 2 people. Don't ever plate the pasta and dry and then put the sauce on it on the plate and send it out to somebody. Yikes, that is like sacrilegious according to Italians. So this is my beautiful sauce that I made myself. So what I'm going to do is add it into the pasta And we're going to then stir it around and combine it and then plate it and serve it. So now inside the pot, I'm going to stir the sauce and the pasta to combine them together. And the goal is to make the sauce stick to the pasta. That's about the amount of sauce you'd want to use in general for any pasta dish, whether it's spaghetti, rigatoni, or fusilli, any shape. You want it to look like the sauce is sticking to the edge of the pasta and not swimming in it. That's a huge difference between the way classic American Italian pasta dishes are from traditional Italian pasta dishes that come from Italy. So now that it's combined, you can see the ratio of the pasta to the sauce that I have, and I'm going to plate it. So at this point, you are just kind of eyeballing how much goes in which dish. But again, in the beginning, we did weigh our pasta, so we know that each one is gonna have roughly 120 grams of pasta. All right, now I'm going to add some grated Parmesan cheese on top to finish it off. And there you have your fabulous homemade sauce and pasta dish that you can do yourself. So now that your mouth is probably watering and you need a way to dress up that pasta, I have a very simple and quick tutorial for how to make your own pasta sauce from scratch. You're going to love it. Jump into that video and I'll see you in there.